Óglaigh na hÉireann, the Irish Republican Army, is regarded as one of the oldest, most professional and most successful guerrilla armies of the 20th century. Numerous struggles throughout the world have taken inspiration from its example. Even their enemies, in secret captured documents, have described the IRA as a dedicated, committed and formidable foe. For the past 30 years, the IRA has fought a successful guerrilla war against one of the largest European powers. Who is this army, and where did it come from? Ireland was Britain's first colony, but not its last. Many other native people suffered the yoke of the British Empire. But in almost every generation, the Irish people rose up in rebellion. The land today is dotted with the remains of forts built to keep watch over the unruly Irish. But it was in the early 1900s that the most successful uprising took place. In Dublin City, at Easter 1916, militant Irish Republicans staged an insurrection and declared Ireland a republic, free from British rule. The insurrection was short-lived. Leaders of the rising were arrested, imprisoned, then executed. But their actions and sacrifice touched a deep nerve among the Irish people and inspired a new generation. In the guerrilla campaign that followed, the newly formed Irish Republican Army engaged British forces at all levels. In the countryside, their flying columns inflicted major casualties upon enemy forces. In the city, British intelligence operatives were identified and executed. The guerrilla war ended in 1921. Under threat from armed Protestant loyalists in the northeastern part of Ireland, Britain partitioned the country. In the north, a Protestant state for a Protestant people was formed. Irish Catholic nationalists were to have no say in this new state. The B Specials, a newly created state militia, waged a bloody sectarian campaign against them. For the next 50 years, Irish Catholic nationalists lived as second-class citizens in a unionist state within their own country. They suffered poor housing, job discrimination and the denial of voting rights. In 1968, they began to organise and campaign for basic civil rights. The response of the state was as ever. Marchers and campaigners were violently assaulted. Catholic areas were invaded and entire streets burned out. The largest movement of population in a European country since the Second World War took place as people fled for safety. But an angry and risen people are not easily cowed. In running street battles, armed only with sticks, stones and petrol bombs, they forced the heavily armed RUC and B Specials out of their communities. With their police and militias under pressure, the state called in the British Army. Internment without trial was reintroduced, just as it had been in the 1920s, 30s, 50s and 60s. Hundreds of young nationalists were rounded up and imprisoned. Many were tortured. When people protested against internment, they were again beaten off the streets. when the beatings didn't work, guns were turned upon the people. Derry City, 30th of January, 1972. 14 people were murdered on a Sunday afternoon by British paratroops. The British government and the Northern Unionist state had effectively declared war upon the nationalist people, and they responded. The battle lines were clearly drawn. Irish Republicans wanted a socialist democratic republic free from British interference. Britain wanted to maintain the status quo in Ireland. To do so meant increasing repression, building more prisons, more lookout posts, more military barracks, deploying more troops and police. It also meant denying that what Britain was engaged in was attempting to suppress a centuries-old anti-colonial struggle. Captured volunteers were now to be treated as common criminals and not political prisoners. But the volunteers fought as heroically inside the prisons as they had without, and resisted all attempts to criminalise them. On the outside, the IRA had gone through a major transformation. Now organised into small units under a central command system, they became more secretive, more efficient, and ultimately much more effective. Just how effective was soon evidenced. On the 27th of August 1979, the IRA killed 18 members of the British Parachute Regiment in an elaborate military operation at Narrowwater, County Down. This was the British Army's highest casualty rate from one operation, since 22 were killed in the Israeli invasion of Egypt in 1956. Within the prisons, the volunteers' protest came to a height in 1980 and 81 when they embarked upon a hunger strike. The community rallied behind them as ever. During the fast, one of the volunteers, Bobby Sands, was elected a member of the British Parliament. Another volunteer, Kieran Doherty, was elected a member of the Irish Parliament. It didn't save their lives though. In all, 10 prisoners died on hunger strike before their main demand was met. Their burials prompted the largest demonstration of nationalist sentiment seen since the Easter Rising of 1916. They also had an impact outside of Ireland. In the USA, there were marches in New York, Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco. The state of Rhode Island declared a day of mourning. The Longshoremen's Union blacked all British ships on the day of the funeral. The Portuguese Parliament observed a minute's silence, as did the Indian Parliament. In France and Iran, 2 streets were renamed Bobby Sands Street. The state and its military forces were shocked and outraged by such open displays of popular support for the guerrilla fighters. Unable to identify or capture the volunteers, they attacked the people who sustained them. With plastic bullets and live ammunition, they killed 16 people during the period of the hunger strike, 5 of them children. In the month of May alone, 1 plastic bullet was fired every several seconds. The IRA hit back. 8 British soldiers, 14 members of the RUC police force and 6 members of the local militia, the UDR, were killed that summer. The state was shaken to its core. Not only had it a guerrilla army to contend with, it now had a politically organised mass of people on the streets. In elections, Sinn Féin, the Republican political party, won resounding victories. The state responded with more repression. Elected representatives of Sinn Féin were banned from the airwaves. Dozens of people were imprisoned through the use of paid informants.